button. So we'll be recording this too. So you'll be able to go out and share this on not only Facebook, but also we'll have it on our YouTube channel later too. So I'm going to give Facebook just a minute or two to notify everybody that we're live. So I'll fill a little bit of airtime. And I always, we've been doing this now. I think next week it'll be actually a year that we've started doing live virtual events. So who knew that we'd be doing it this long? But I love them. I think it's kind of fun. It's a whole different world. And I anticipate us doing this even when we come back to doing live stuff.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I think it would be good to do. So I always start out with this. My apologies to those of you that tune in with us all the time, because you hear me say this over and over and over again. But we do have, and Huda and Laura haven't heard my spiel, so.
Yeah, bring it on.
And I'm sure it's worth repeating.
So, and who knows, we may have people joining us from all over. In fact, Laura, where are you joining us from? Are you in Cleveland?
Yeah, I'm in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep, that's right. I've heard that in that. So yeah, so welcome from Cleveland. So we might have some people from Cleveland here. So Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. And so for those of you that are in the San Diego area, we'd love to see you stop by the store. We are open for business. We're keeping everybody safe with masks and social distancing. And Huda, you know the store. There's nothing better than coming into Warwick's and shopping both sides of the store. Book side has great selection. But we have a fun side on the other side too.
So fun.
Yeah.
I've been in a couple of times since the pandemic too, and it is very comfortable.
Yeah. So we were keeping everybody safe, and so it's all, knock on wood, all good things going on. So the other side has got great gifts and jewelry and fine pens and leather and all kinds of fun goodies and gifts.
And see.
Yeah. So you need to get out here, Laura. So when we're able to travel more openly, come on out.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
So for those of you that are joining us in Facebook tonight, I will be putting Laura's book into the comment section, so you can easily click on that. Huda, I'll put your book in there as well, so people can easily click on that and order it. When you order from us, you can select online, you can select picking up at the store, or we can ship it to you. And rumor has it, I'm hearing that we ship things out media mail and they're actually getting to people like within a week. So it's pretty good.
I just ordered something from Warwick's today. So if anyone who's watching this, super easy, and just have it shipped to your house and support indies.
So you can see how quickly you'll get it.
Yeah.
You can be the test there on that. You can be the test. You can come back in the comments and go, oh, she lied. It took two. So in the comment section too, there is a way for you to participate tonight. So if you have any questions for Laura, Huda, just feel free to put those into the comment section. They're going to talk for about 35-ish minutes. So we won't be bringing those questions in live. I'll pop back on later and we'll bring the questions in then. So with that, I think Facebook has had enough time to let everybody know we're here. So let's start the fun. So Laura Maylene Walter is a writer and editor in Cleveland. Should have known you were in Cleveland by the first line of your bio that I just read a couple. Her writing has appeared in Poets and Writers, Kenyon Review, The Sun, Ninth Letter, The Master's Review, and many other publications. She has been a Tin House Scholar, a recipient of the Ohioan Library Association's Walter Rumsey Marvin Grant, that was a mouthful, and a writer in residence in Yaddo, the Chautauqua Institution, and Art Omi Writers. Is that correct? Did I get that right? Yeah. Here we go. She's here to talk to us tonight about Body of Stars, her debut. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Just released 2 days ago. So we are hot off there it is. Beautiful. Hot off the presses. There you go. So with her today is Huda Al-Marashi. Huda is the author of First Comes Marriage, My Not So Typical American Love Story, a memoir the Washington Post called a charming, funny, heartbreaking memoir of faith, family, and the journey to love. We had a wonderful event with Huda a couple of years ago, so another dear to our hearts. Her writing has also appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Al Jazeera, and elsewhere. First Comes Marriage was a long listed for the Chautauqua Prize and a finalist for the Southern California Independent Booksellers Award. So with that, ladies, have a great conversation, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Julie. This event means a lot to me on a personal level. It's bringing together my two literary homes. I got started in my writing career in Cleveland, which is where I met Laura. And I moved out to San Diego in 2016. And as Julie mentioned, I had the wonderful opportunity to launch my memoir with Warwick's. And it was a dream of mine to bring Laura out here when it was her turn. And I'm so glad that we're still able to do this virtually. So to give you a little background on us, we met in 2006 in a public fiction writing workshop based out of Cleveland State University. And we were both baby fledgling writers. And back then neither one of us were working on the books that became our books. Laura, what were you working on when we first met?
It must have been just a bunch of short stories. I think I might have had an early novel back then, but I can't even remember. So short fiction.
I can. They were short stories. I do remember.
Oh, thank you. Please tell me because I don't remember.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are many of the short stories that are in your first short story collection that are in living arrangements. And that's when I first, got introduced to your writing. And I remember being struck by how beautiful your prose was. But, like literary friendships are kind of like relationships, right? It's not like we met each other and got to exchanging work right away. I think we let that whole kind of semester pass. And at the end, when it was summer, you wrote a note on one of my manuscripts. And you said, if you're interested in working more over the summer, call me. Do you remember that?
I do. And I remember before doing that, maybe one of the first workshops when your piece, your work was up for discussion. It is funny when you talk about these classes because I don't want to relate it to dating someone, but it did make me think like, oh, like right away, I knew I loved your writing. I liked how you talked about writing. I had the sense we could be friends. But of course, as a shy introvert, that's why it probably took me 6 months to write you a note as if we're in junior high and ask if, maybe we could talk. But and I knew right away that we could.
I was so new to the writing world that I didn't even know that was something to do, that you,
right.
Your work. And I was like, oh, this is so exciting, somebody to keep sharing my work to. And then that was the beginning of this work exchange that we used to do. And just a work exchange, it was also an accountability partnership, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We, in addition to exchanging work and critiquing it, we would also meet to work in coffee shops. And also with a third friend I brought in from a different community writing workshop, Jennifer Marie Donahue. Jennifer, hi, we're thinking of you today. So the three of us would meet. We all, by good luck, lived fairly close to each other. Mm-hmm. And so there's a coffee shop. I could walk there from my apartment at the time. And we would say, hey, see you Tuesday night at 7. And we would meet there and sit there and write. And I think we did that for years. And I think it really helped us get work done for sure.
It did. And that's why I really wanted to mention it for any, emerging writers that are listening. I highly recommend this arrangement to anyone. Make these appointments with people that hold you accountable to like coming out and getting the work done. And you mentioned our third friend, Jennifer. And this is the other thing that I think is like a good thing to mention. It wasn't like we had one workshop and we were one and done. You and I had like a leg in so many community workshops. And we were constantly trying to, call from the top and like find the writers that we liked and kept forming other workshops. And the reason why I wanted to bring up our forming these mini workshops is in 2013 is when you brought in your first chapter of what you were calling back then constellations. Was it just constellations or constellations for girls?
It was the latter, but that title seems so strange to me now because Body of Stars is the book's true title of its heart, which is really funny. And I don't want to interrupt our very serious literary conversation, but this is my first book event where my cat Cirrus has joined me. So I just want to introduce everyone to Cirrus. He is happily curled up on my lap. But anyway,
anybody who follows you on Instagram is going to get to know Cirrus because he's with all your book shares.
Yes. He definitely is. And so he's being very supportive during my book launch. But so that was 2013.
Well, in honor of our event, I went back to our old and I dug up the first time you submitted constellations to us. It was in May of 2013.
Wow.
I pulled up what I wrote to you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I did not know any of this was coming, by the way.
Yeah,
So.
this is my surprise for her. I won't read long. It's just a line.
Okay.
Dear Laura, I'm so excited to have finally read Constellations. It is really a wonderful concept, and I know it's on its way to becoming your breakout novel. Consider how compelling of a read it is. In this preliminary state, you are in very good shape. And of course, I went on to write for more critique, but I wanted to invite you right now to tell us a little bit about the concept. I mean, the concept of this book is so compelling. And it's something that, like, when you told me about it and when you read the first pages, even though it wasn't in the shape that it is now, your book's changed so much, it always gave me chills.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that. And thank you for digging up that old critique. That is a blast from the past. I appreciate it.
God bless Google Gmail search. It's so easy.
Yeah, our lives are in our Gmail accounts. It's a little scary,
Yeah.
but it's great. It's useful. So the book, the premise is Body of Stars is set in a world where women's bodies foretell the future. So specifically, it's the patterns of freckles and birthmarks and moles on women's bodies that spell out certain future events. And so this is a real part of the world. It's real, it really happens. These predicted events do come true. And so back then, when the book was very early, very new, I still had a lot to learn, but I knew I was very excited about this idea where the future is marked on women, but it's a regressive society. And so the question is, who really owns the future and who really has control over women's bodies? Because men want to access those markings. They want to access the future. They don't have that ability themselves on their own bodies. So they need to turn to women for it. So I knew right away there would be that tension. And yeah, I was just really drawn to writing about, a world where certain future events can be predicted.
And the thing that struck me in those early drafts is you had come up with this concept of this changeling period, that women are born with one set of marks, and then they go through this transition where they become irresistible to men and, to anybody, right? They become charged with this kind of energy. And it really struck me back then, and it stayed with me because it so mimics kind of this transition that girls face in adolescence, where they suddenly have a woman's body and they're attracting all kinds of male attention, and it comes with a certain kind of power in itself too. And I thought you could read to us a little bit about that changeling time period, some of the changeling chapters.
Yes. I'll just read a very short excerpt from the book from chapter 9. And so as Huda said, when girls are growing up and becoming women, their markings do change once, and they then gain a map of their entire adult lives of what their predictions will be. And it's this period where the girls are luminous and even more beautiful and really appealing and attractive and considered valuable because they have these new maps to the future. They also go through a period where they have, I mentioned it in this excerpt, high lucidity, which is basically just heightened senses. So the girls themselves are, taking in the world even more, just as the world is taking in them more. So I'll just read a couple of pages. To be a changeling was to be exposed, peeled back and laid bare. At school, I could no longer slip by as an anonymous girl. I startled people, making them jump like they just heard a clap of thunder. My history teacher cocked his head whenever I passed his classroom, and outside, the boys running on the athletic field shifted simultaneously as I walked along the fence line. That morning, I turned from my locker to find myself surrounded by boys. They appeared as if from nowhere and fanned around me, creating a barrier too strong to break through. Dirty blue jeans, untucked shirts, ragged haircuts, shoes streaked with grass stains. They were earthy and unapologetic in their disarray, as only boys could be. Can you give me some space? I asked. The boys leaned forward a few degrees, and I clutched my geometry book to my chest like a shield. I was protecting myself, but I was also holding myself back. I saw my male classmates in a new way that morning. They were thrilling and raw, bodies driven by want. New thoughts drifted into my mind, thoughts of kissing and contact, of those flat boy chests pressing right up against me. The boys drew closer. My back was against the lockers. A wanting started to crack through my body, a surge that broke off in pieces like a glacier calving. I desired power, I desired control, I desired freedom, I desired. One boy reached out, his fingertip inches from my shoulder. Keep going, I thought, while also thinking at the same time, stop. My homeroom teacher was the one to save me. She hurried up to the boys and startled them, made them scatter like birds taking flight. When I caught her eye, she smiled. Boys, she said simply, like that was explanation enough. I moved from class to class in a blur. I was getting better at controlling my senses, at tamping down the sensory data flooding every moment. Some girls fell in love with their high lucidity and through a depression once it came to an end. Others tried to make money off it by hiring themselves out to chefs to be expert taste testers or by creating new color palettes for designers. But not everyone trusted high lucidity. Some people considered it false, a form of hysteria. Cassandra was the type to embrace her heightened senses. We met in the school bathroom and stood in front of a single mirror, our hip bones jutting against the sink. Cassandra leaned in close to study her pores. She said it was like seeing straight into her body. I opened my mouth wide and peered at my molars, the soft tissue under my tongue. I laughed a little. It was nothing short of bizarre, all that was inside us. I took off my sweater, relieved to feel unburdened of the hot material for at least a few moments. Underneath, I wore a sleeveless undershirt, and Cassandra reached out to touch my upper arm. She ran her finger up and down, calling the tiny hairs along my arm to attention. I reached for her hair, all gloss and velvet. It felt heavy, like I could weigh the protein in each strand. So much of what people said about changeling girls was urban legend. If someone had burst into the bathroom right then, they might have started a rumor about Cassandra and me, how we turned to each other out of sheer mindless attraction. But this wasn't about sex for us. It was about wonder and mystery and the joy of feeling the slightest touch to the core of your being. It was the kind of connection only possible between changeling girls. And I'll stop there.
I love that passage because I think like the very best fiction can take things that kind of we don't have names for and words for in our own life, but create this world where you start to, it's like a mirror of your own world. And I remember after I was, working with you on your book, everywhere I went and I kind of see these teenage girls, charged with these kind of the power and the energy of youth and that attraction and that beauty of you. Oh, there goes another changeling girl. And, it gives you kind of like a language to talk about it. And so, let's talk about the world building, because you essentially had to build another world to write this book.
Yes, a whole society. And more than that, as I came to learn, a way of thinking and viewing the world. Because if you're part of something that the future can be predicted, it has been like that for ages. It's just a fact of life. That would change so much. It would change how people view the world, how they view everything. And so when I started writing, I was just writing based on instinct and based on the story. And I really had to take some time to think about how this would work. And the challenge I found, because this was the first time I tried to write a speculative novel, so a novel length project set in a different world, was of course the classic problem is you want to convey the world to the reader. You want to show the reader what the world is, but you also don't want to outright explain it too much, which is often easier said than done. Especially my narrator, Celeste, this is her world. So she's not going to think to explain it in detail to the reader because this is just part of her. It's ingrained in her. So that was not something I could do overnight. That really took a lot, as you know, Huda, a lot of time, a lot of thinking, a lot of like just going over it layer by layer.
It was technically challenging. Like it was a technical challenge to figure out how to layer in to give the reader the information that we needed to get.
Right, exactly. And to make it not only make sense, but hopefully make it compelling so that the reader would be drawn into the world, believe the world, and then want to keep turning the page. So that's a tall order.
And you had to do some research even to create this fictional world. Like it wasn't just, something that you pulled out of thin air. Do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of research you did?
Sure. And I told you I would have the medical textbook here next to me, and I don't, but I used various sources. So I did some research. First of all, since the book is about predicting the future, I researched various fortune-telling techniques from across cultures and across societies. I used a medical textbook from the early 1900s, this huge book, and it's actually so big, I would have had a hard time holding it all up to the camera anyway. And it's very old and delicate, so I need to be careful with it. But it is this fascinating book. It is just full of, there's diagrams, there's pull out, like pop out body diagrams of the skeletal system of the organs. And then there's all this information talking about how women should behave and women's health. The women's health section is really wild. Just talk, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head if wandering uteruses are discussed specifically in this book, but that's the grade that we're talking about here. That's like what's in there.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating. So I use that because the Society and Body of Stars is, it is patriarchal. It is regressive. It's not a futuristic society. I think of it more as being a bit in the past if we were comparing it to our world. And so,
Right.
It's ultimately run by men too. And so men are writing a guidebook about women, how to read the markings, how women should behave, how girls should behave to protect themselves. A lot of this type of language that frankly we still have today in 2021 when we hear about how women can protect themselves from being assaulted versus how men should, not be assaulting people. So all of this, it all informed the world of the novel, and it all came together, I hope, to help me create the world, which was such a complicated undertaking.
Yeah, and it was like, as somebody who was with you from your early drafts, I was seeing kind of how that world emerged. And speaking of that medical textbook, the manifestation of that is kind of like you got a book within the book. And for those who are, I know nobody's in a bookstore actually able to look at the book. So Body of the Stars is a really cool book. I mean, it's just a really uniquely interesting done with these kind of illustrations. Laura, would you just explain a little bit about the book within a book, about mapping the future, about what you were doing here, where you pulled this from? And
Sure. So one of my challenges of creating the world was, if these markings are foretelling the future and predicting certain events, how does that physically work? And I would say the whole first draft, I had no idea. I was just thinking, oh, it's just magical. I don't know. And eventually I had to realize that that's not good enough. And I had to answer that question for myself. So there is a guidebook in this world called Mapping the Future. I think of it as a Bible, and it has everything. It explains everything of which markings will predict what event. So for example, your right hip will be the place where your career will be predicted. And based on the arrangement of the markings on your hip, it means this, this, or this. And so that's what that big body diagram is. It's showing different large categories on the body for where the markings are. Later, I also have more detailed markings, the patterns. And so it will actually pull out and say, so this mole is up to the left and it's larger than this mole right here. And so that means this. So I had to kind of plan that out in my own mind so I could actually understand, because in the beginning of the process, people in my, you, Jennifer, others in other writing groups would ask me questions about the world of the book and how it worked. And I found I could not answer them. And so that's always a sign. When you can't answer those questions, you need to figure it out for yourself before it's ready.
And you did a job. I mean, I really thought when you came up with those, they ended up becoming prefaces to the different chapters, that it was so clever and so well done. And, the other thing that I think you weren't expecting in the writing the book was how, kind of dark the society had to end up becoming, right? I think it started out like you have this idea of women who are being marked, and it was almost like sad for even us as readers growing up with you to see that whenever you have women in a society and there's men, this power dynamic is going to emerge, right? So let's talk a little bit about, like handling heavier, dark themes in your work. As a memoirist, like I relate to that struggle. Sometimes I feel like readers will take their own discomfort with a text and not know what to do with that, right? And they'll say, oh, I didn't like this book or this part of the book because it made me uncomfortable. So let's just talk about discomfort as writers, you know, what it makes us think about and why we push into it a little bit.
Yes, and I often think of you and other writers of memoir and nonfiction and how that adds a whole new layer to it when you're actually writing about your life. It's funny, a lot of people try to find that autobiographical element even in fiction, but for memoir, that's a whole other ball. But me trying to use a sports metaphor, that's never going to go well. So when I started writing this book, in the very, very beginning, when I came up with the premise, I was just so dazzled by the premise and I was so excited to write about women's bodies predicting the future. And I did know right away that this was going to create tension between men and women, especially in a society that has really strict, limited views of what gender is and gender roles. And they view gender as very binary. So I knew there would be a lot of tension and problems there. I knew that this is something that would be considered, it would grant women power to have these predictions, but it would also make them vulnerable to men. I knew that right away.
Right.
And then as I kept writing, I sort of realized, oh no, it's going to be a little darker. And it does, this book is a critique of rape culture. It does have some themes of sexual assault, and that was not something I had wanted to write about because, you know, our culture is full of those stories in so many different ways. Sometimes those stories paint women as victims. Sometimes I think they can be exploitative, and I really didn't want any part of that. But the nature of the story, you know, much like The Handmaid's Tale or something like that, it was a necessary part of it. So what I did was I tried my best, I hope, to be really sensitive and to, again, not exploit what happens, not exploit the characters or the women in the book, give them their own agency and make it not a story about, about just violence, but women's reactions to the world and trying to take control of their own bodies. So it was hard. And there were lots of times when I wondered, why do I have to write this? But I think that's often the case with writing, that you ultimately do feel driven to put out there, that it does feel necessary, even if it's not easy.
Yeah, I relate to that. And when something is just necessary, even the writer yourself don't feel like this is the story you want to be telling, but the narrative itself kind of propels you in that direction, and it becomes
it just becomes maybe urgent. And it helped me with this book that I still did have this magical element of the future being predicted in bodies. I feel like that added a new dimension to it that I think helped, and it helped me stay invested in the project too.
Yeah, and it fits right into these kind of very contemporary conversations that we're having about toxic masculinity, about the Me Too movement, and yet you started this years before even that conversation became timely, and I think it says a lot too about where we're at in society. It has always been timely, right? But our fiction, this art is actually helping us articulate this conversation better than we ever have before.
Right. And it's bleak that it still remains timely,
Timely,
and I fear it will be for, years into the future. But yes, there is a different conversation around it now, and more light being put onto it. And so hopefully this book can enter that conversation.
Well, speaking of years and speaking of a long time and things that always seem to be sticking around for a long time, you and I are both very long road to publication authors, right? We met in 2006. We were both working on different manuscripts. We ended up sticking them in the drawer. We ended up trying other manuscripts. My book just came out into 2018. I shared how you showed us our first chapter of this in 2013. Talk a little bit about this long road to publication. What has that been like for you? Give us some tips on persisting when it's so tempting to give up.
Yes. So, one thing I do want to say, if there are any writers listening to this, working on their own novels, their own books, is that often it's normal for it to take longer than you think it will take. That is the standard experience. So you're not falling behind, you're not doing anything wrong. Like, this is a long, slow business, and it's a long, slow career, and to develop into it. So, that's the first thing. I speak with a lot of writers, I teach workshops, and I feel always this collective anxiety about things taking too long. And I get it. I was often in a hurry, so I understand, but really it's normal. So you're okay if you feel like you're behind. But so Body of Stars, as you were able to show us, I started it, I came up with the idea in 2012 and I was drafting in 2013. Now I definitely put it aside because I then entered an MFA program where it's just easier to work on short fiction or short things.
Right.
So I largely was taking breaks from the novel. I was working on other things, which was good because it helped me develop into a stronger writer in other ways. And so, I mean, it was really the last 3 or maybe 4 years that I was working really intensely on Body of Stars and trying to get it into shape. And, every now and then I would think, wow, I first came up with this idea so long ago. Why is it taking so long? But again, that's so normal. And I had to get better. I had to get more confident. I had to learn the world. I had to learn the story. And so I think all of that was necessary to make it a stronger book. So I don't regret any of that. And in terms of tips, I think it always helps to have good writing friends to vent to. I definitely have that in Huda and also in Jennifer and in other friends too, that, it's a tough business. It's a tough art form. And so having people you can just talk to and share your frustrations. If you have a bad day at the writing desk, if you're querying agents and you haven't heard back for 8 months or something like that, it helps to have friends, and it helps to just always, just keep at it. I would get inspired by just trying to find new things to read that I really love, to remind myself, like, this is what I want to do one day. I want to be able to write this well or this strongly. And so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of grit. Like, what about you? How did you?
That really strikes me about your particular story. It's like we have this kind of fairy tale notion that you're going to like get an agent and then your book is going to really quickly, but you revised a lot with your agent.
I revised overall, a lot, because again, this world was so tricky and I was still figuring it out. And I would like to think I really picked up a lot, and I do feel like a different writer now. So I feel I can do it a lot faster. People
know this, but like as your own like as a critique partner, you want to like be doing right by your friend. And I remember like every time you would get more critiques from your agent, I would be like, Laura, can you teach me? Can you show me what she's finding? Because I couldn't see what she was seeing anymore. And let's talk a little bit about fresh eye reading, like how this is a thing, right? I think we're making it sound kind of like magical that we had this magical friendship, which it was, and we were able to do a lot for each other, but even that has its limits, right?
Oh, it definitely does. I tell my writing students this as well, that maybe try to save, like, don't just jot down a first draft of anything and immediately throw it at your critique partners, we all have to do that in various ways. I've done that, especially if I'm on deadline for something. But the first read is the most important read. And that is when you get fresh eyes and you get the best perspective and insight from your writing friends. And all of us in our writing friendship have had each other read things multiple times. I mean, we've done that, but every time it gets a little harder. It's harder for the reader. They're coming at it already having seen it. It's just a different experience. And so the first fresh read is definitely the most important. And also, I feel like the more times you give a revised piece of writing to someone, kind of the closer your relationship has to be, because you have to really, for you to read parts of my book over and over again. And I have some other friends who have done that too. That is like a labor of love. It really is, because it's hard and you have to consciously try to stay fresh and try to look at it in new ways. So it's not easy. And so I always tell writers, just be aware of that, and that you shouldn't expect to just, and especially timing helps too. You need to give yourself breaks in between drafts, but also your writing friends need, like, the longer of a break they have, the better. So don't like revise chapter 1 over and over and keep handing it every week to them. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Absolutely. Yes, that is such a good point. Like, you brought up so many really good points. One is it's kind of like a village. Even when you have like a really great critique partners, you need critique partners outside your critique partners, because even your critique partners' eyes can get tired. Then your critique partners, like, you have to give, this whole process takes a long time. because I had the opportunity to go back and look at our old emails, I saw that you sent me your first full draft in August of 2014. And then I didn't send it back to you with my comments until October, end of October. So it's like, it was a 2-month turnaround, you know, every time.
I mean,
shared
that's a whole
the full
manuscript.
read.
That's a
Right.
lot to read, because I'm not paying you to read my book. You know, you have a life, and everyone has
Right.
lives, and you need to give people time. That's a good point. You need to give them
That
time
you
to
need
read
to
your
give
work.
people time. And that is like, you know, not to make these comparisons to dating again, but like, it's like a place you get to in your relationship, because it's a big ask to ask somebody to read your whole manuscript. So that's the next
Yeah.
level of closeness, where they're in your inner circle and you can say, hey, can I give you the whole thing? And then there's a kind of like a reciprocity there, right?
Right. You expect, if you're giving them your whole manuscript, you should absolutely be prepared to do the same for them when the time comes. And so you need to trust each other and know each other well enough to know, you know, maybe I'll be giving you lots of things in one year. I'll be giving you like a full novel and a bunch of stories, because I need that right then. And it might take you or another friend, it might take them a while before they have something to send to me back, but I'll be ready for it no matter what. You know, you need to have that give and take of helping each other out when the timing is right.
And so this brings me to this thing that I have always respected and admired about you, is I think you're a really more than just an author, but you're genuinely like a model literary citizen, right? And there's more to it than just writing, right? And I just want you to take a minute and share a little bit about your literary citizenry. You do a lot in the community, and talk up a little bit about your teaching, about your workshops, about your
well, thank you,
editing.
first of all. And it is, I can't remember who told me this, but I remember years ago someone trying to describe what it means to be a good literary citizen to someone or to a community. And she said, you know what, it's not that hard. Just try to be a good friend. And what I think it comes down to is not always thinking about yourself all the time or your own
Right.
books. I mean,
Right.
you know, you could see this if you're going to a reading, you're going to really celebrate the other authors and to buy a book from the independent bookstore, instead of just thinking, you know, what can I get out of this at the end of the night? And so, I mean, here in Cleveland, I'm the editor-in-chief of Gordon Square Review, which is a literary journal. That journal is run by Literary Cleveland, a nonprofit organization here. So I do teach classes or workshops, things like that for them. And I've been in various writing groups. I work for Cleveland Public Library, so that's not so much on the writing side, but sometimes for them, I'll cover events they host involving writing. And it's just trying to support other writers and sharing their work online, offering them, you know, doing critiques, and just being aware that this writing itself is so solitary. We're all at the desk alone, and it's really hard, but there are many ways that we can come together and support each other, read each other's work, offer critiques, go to each other's events, whether virtual or maybe in person again one day soon, I hope. And just try to realize it's not just about any one person in their writing. It's about, we're all made richer and better by having a variety of voices to read and to celebrate.
And tell our San Diego audience a little bit about like the literary landscape in Cleveland, because I think that's something kind of unique that a lot of people outside the country may not know about. And
yeah, I mean,
we'll hop back on with questions.
Yeah, and Julie can come back on and start getting ready. I'll just say quickly, you know, Cleveland is a great place to be a writer. I think we have, you know, we've got great independent bookstores, first of all, and we have groups like Literary Cleveland, but there are also other fantastic literary organizations, 12 Literary Arts, all sorts of things. And we have reading series in better times, of course. And so it is a great place. And I hear San Diego is wonderful as well. And I think no matter what city you live in or town you live in, it just comes down to going to these events in some capacity, getting to know your booksellers or your librarians, and just, you know, becoming a part of the community and trying to learn. We're all introverts here, but you can still do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Trust me.
And it's so true. That great conversation, you two. And there were so many things in the background that I was jotting down stuff that I wanted to know too. Because the one thing that you talked about is, and it's so important. I mean, I'm the director of events at Warwick's, and Huda, you know, I do tons of events here. When it was live, it was even more nerve-wracking, especially for a debut author, to go to a store and to think about who's coming. And so the community of authors supporting each other and coming out if you know anybody, it's so important. And all of you are so supportive of each other, and it's fantastic. So because I know there's a group of ladies down here that if somebody's coming from across the country, they're showing up. So
oh, great. Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
It's really, because like you said, it's a very solitary endeavor.
Yeah,
it is.
And the other thing you were talking about too, which I thought was really fascinating, was the whole manuscript and reading of the manuscripts. We get it from the editors, the booksellers get it from the editor side. And the one thing that helps us is, and I don't know if it's the same way when you're in that raw manuscript stage, is not only giving people time, but then giving them a deadline too. Just say, hey, I
Good
really
point,
need
yeah.
like some feedback by X date, you know. Do you
That
guys do
is
that
smart.
too?
Yeah, and I think that's where the reciprocity comes in. Like, for me, because I'm going to do it for you, and so
Yeah. But I kind of need it by, you know, in 3 weeks or 2
yeah.
or
If you don't
whatever,
put a date on it, it will
And you
just
know what?
be out there forever. Yeah.
That's like, again, like that next level of closeness, because Laura and Jennifer are my two closest writing friends, and they're the only ones that I'll do like a 24-hour turnaround. Like, do something.
And you're the only ones I would ever
timely.
ask for that as
Yeah.
well. I think I just did last week, right? I had an essay, and it's always with a lot of apologies. I'm so sorry, but I'm on deadline. If you can't get to it, that's okay.
But see, for her, I'll drop everything. I'll stay up late. I'll do whatever it takes, because I know she'd do the same thing for me. They've saved me a bunch of times.
And that's where, like you said, where you know those people that you can do that to, you know. And
I always tell her we have the most unhealthy codependent relationship, and I've signed off emails before. You know, nothing can ever happen to you because I cannot work without you. Like, I can't get this to this level with somebody else again. It takes time.
It does. It takes time and work. Yeah.
And it's a trust thing, and it does take time to trust, you know, somebody, and to know that the feedback that's coming is good feedback, good or bad, you know what I mean?
No, and it's at a certain level.
That it's honest feedback that's coming back.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, because it's like when you give stuff to your friends, they're like, oh, it's great. And it's like, they're really thinking, oh, it's great.
Right. And not all writers are good readers, like critiquers. And Laura is an excellent critiquer. She gives great feedback. And
well, thank you. Same to you.
So I think you guys covered this earlier, but for Barbara might have joined us a little bit later. I'm not sure, but she wants to know, Laura, how did you get the idea for Body of Stars and creating this new world? Can you sum it up?
Yeah. I'll sum it up quickly. I actually was at a writing conference, which is a good reason to be going out and doing things like this. So I was at a writing conference in a craft class, and we were asked as a class to each, take a few minutes to do a writing exercise, something speculative involving the body. And that was just the prompt. And I looked down at my arm, and then I literally looked at the moles on my arm and just thought, oh, what if the pattern of those moles could spell out the future? And I started free writing with no expectations. And that's how the idea first formed. And really quickly, I felt I knew who the main characters were and what kind of the primary source of tension would be. So I like to say it was a little bit of magic that day, because that seems rare. That doesn't always happen that quickly.
And what made you decide to put it into a different world?
I did decide that I wanted it to be, so the world is very similar to our world, except that this little bit of future telling is real. So I knew I didn't want it to be like a twist, like, this isn't actually real. It's real. So of course that had to make it an alternate world. And then I kept a lot of the other details that are recognizable from our world. So it's not like a completely science fiction futuristic world. It's just got this element to it.
Nicole is on here, and Nicole's just making great comments, and she says thank you for inviting her. She doesn't really have a question, but she just wanted to say hi. So
hi Nicole. Thanks.
Will you set any other books in this or are you going to write something totally different?
So I did write this as a standalone novel, and I don't currently have any plans to do that. I'm not saying I'm definitely against it, but right now I'm thinking of writing different things and trying something completely new.
Perfect. Yeah. And I know this is always putting both of you on the spot, and I apologize because anytime anybody asks me this question, I completely go blank. But
Oh no, yeah.
you know what I'm going to ask, right? But I always want to, people are going to read this and they're going to read through it super quickly, and hopefully they'll read Huda's book. So is there a book or two or an author or two that you, and I'll start with you, Huda, that you want to lift up besides Laura today?
Oh, you know what? I met Jasmine Darznik at Works for her book event, and she was so kind to offer me a blurb on First Comes Marriage, and she has a book coming out.
Yeah, she does.
And I adore her, and I adore her work, and I love her books. And I think anybody who enjoyed my book would enjoy The Good Daughter and any of her books as well.
Perfect. And that's Jasmine Darznik for those of you that I might have been talking over when you said that, because I was like, oh yeah. Sorry. so Laura, how about you?
Just a few books I read recently that I really enjoyed. We Ride Upon Sticks.
Oh yeah.
By Quan Berry, I believe, if that's correct. It's hilarious. I mean, it's definitely a different tone from Body of Stars, but it's a field hockey team in the 80s who start practicing witchcraft to win championships. So it's just a wild ride, great 80s references. It's clever, it's witty, it's smart. Loved it. I also just read the Pisces by Melissa Broder, which is a darker kind of lusty book about a woman going through a tough time in her life, and she meets a mysterious man at the beach. So a great kind of literary, almost erotic kind of book, but it's really, really another wild ride. So I love these wild premises for sure.
Love it. Oh my goodness, I love that. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. Huda, if people want to follow or learn more about you, do you have a website or social media that you want to tell people about?
My website's just my name, and you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all also with my name.
Perfect. And Laura, how about you?
Yeah, especially on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Laura Maylene. And I would love to hear from people. I post lots of pictures of books and cats and things like that. So always like to meet new online friends.
Fantastic. Well, like I said, it's a great conversation. Laura, congratulations.
Thank you.
It is a long journey to get here, but it's out in the world, and we'll be raising it up as much as we can.
Oh, Thank great. You so much, Julie.
Much for having us.
Absolutely. Fun. So Good night, Facebook.
Bye-bye.
And YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube.